The heart monitor screamed a single unbroken note. 12 seconds, then 15, then 20. Commander Derek Vane, 3 combat tours, 2 classified operations, 1 presidential commendation, was dying on a gurney in the trauma wing of Hargrove General Hospital while 4 senior physicians stood around him and argued about liability. A night shift nurse named Avery Cross pushed through all of them. She didn't ask permission. She didn't announce herself. She looked at the monitor, looked at the man, and made a call that every doctor in that room had already decided was too risky to make. Step back. Right now. All of you. The monitor stopped screaming 40 seconds later, and then a man in a military uniform walked through the trauma bay doors, took one look at Avery's face, and went completely still. "You're supposed to be dead," he said. If this story already has you holding your breath, you're exactly where I want you. Stay with me until the end. Hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The shift had started the way most Tuesday nights started at Hargrove General, understaffed, overlit, and humming with the specific low-grade tension of a hospital that had too many patients and not enough of anything else. Hargrove sat on the outer edge of Delmont, a mid-sized city in the kind of geography that didn't make anyone's top 10 list. Not quite rural, not quite urban, close enough to the interstate that the trauma bay stayed busy, but far enough from a major metro that the best specialists had long since relocated somewhere with better pay and a cleaner parking structure. Avery Cross had worked the overnight shift for 3 years. She knew every broken ceiling tile in the east corridor. She knew which elevator doors stuck on the way down. She knew that the vending machine on the second floor gave you 2 bags of pretzels if you hit the coin return at exactly the right angle, and she knew that doctor. Philip Storch, the head of night shift internal medicine, had a habit of disappearing for 40-minute stretches around 2 a.m. and reappearing smelling faintly of cigarette smoke and denial. She was 34 years old, medium height, and unremarkable in the way that people who have deliberately practiced being unremarkable tend to be. Brown hair pulled back, no jewelry except a plain watch with a cracked face she'd never gotten around to replacing. She moved through the hospital the way water moves, finding the fastest route, making the least noise, not stopping unless something required stopping. Most of the senior staff didn't know her last name. The attendings called her the night nurse, if they called her anything at all. Doctor Marcus Ellery, the chief of trauma surgery and a man whose ego had its own gravitational field, had once referred to her in rounds as one of the overnight girls, which was the kind of comment that landed in Avery's chest and stayed there without her letting it reach her face. She had learned, a long time ago, not to let things reach her face. She was doing a medication check on the 3rd floor when the alert came through. Trauma incoming, male, approximately 50, cardiac event, special circumstances, military personnel on board requesting direct coordination. That last part was unusual. Most ambulance calls didn't come with a rider about military coordination. She noted it the way she noted most things, filed it, kept moving, didn't speculate. By the time she reached the 2nd floor, she could hear the gurney coming through the bay doors. He was big, even collapsed and unconscious. You could see the structure of someone who had spent decades in physical demand. Late 40s, maybe early 50s, with the kind of weathered face that suggested not just age, but specific, accumulated exposure to things that age people faster than time alone. There was a field dressing on his left side, partially visible beneath a cut-open shirt, and the paramedic calling out vitals sounded calm the way paramedics sound calm when they've already made their peace with a bad outcome. BP 60 over 40 and dropping, heart rate irregular. We had a flat line for approximately 12 seconds in transit, got him back with manual compression. Bay 3, someone called out. Bay 1, Avery said. The paramedic looked at her. The orderly pushing the gurney looked at her. Nobody moved. Bay 1 is reserved for... The charge nurse started. Bay 1 has the crash cart that was restocked this afternoon, Avery said. Bay 3's cart hasn't been touched since the Kepler case on Saturday, and 2 of the defibrillator pads are expired. Bay 1. A half-second of silence. The gurney went to Bay 1. Dr. Ellery arrived 40 seconds later, still buttoning his coat, and the next 40 minutes became the kind of controlled chaos that Hargrove's trauma wing had, on its better nights, learn to manage. 4 physicians, 2 nurses, 1 respiratory tech, and a patient who kept trying to die. Avery worked without being asked, anticipating the next thing before it was called, moving instruments and drawing medications and reading monitors with the quiet fluency of someone doing something they had done before in conditions considerably worse than a hospital bay. She didn't think about why she knew what she knew. She had spent years not thinking about it. The commander, she'd caught the name from the intake sheet, Derek Vane, stabilized around the 40-minute mark. Not well, not out of danger, but stable in the narrow, provisional sense of the word. Heart rate present, BP climbing back towards something survivable. The immediate crisis sealed off for now like a fire that had been contained but not extinguished. Dr. Ellery stepped back from the bay, exhaled, and accepted the small victory of the moment with the expression of a man who had just won an argument he hadn't been sure he'd win. Avery was recapping a syringe when she heard him say it. "Good work, everyone." A pause. "Especially those of us who actually have the training for it." She didn't look up. But the respiratory tech, a young woman named Greta, who had only been at Hargrove for 4 months, did. She looked at Avery and then at Dr. Ellery, and then back at Avery with the uncertain expression of someone waiting to see how the person with more experience was going to handle it. Avery set the syringe down, labeled it, moved to the next task. That was how you handled it. You kept moving. The man who arrived at 2:47 a.m. didn't come through the front entrance. He came through the ambulance bay with 2 other men in civilian clothes that fit slightly wrong in the shoulders, the way civilian clothes always fit wrong on people whose shoulders had been built for other purposes. He was in his late 40s, silver-haired, carrying the particular stillness of someone accustomed to walking into rooms and immediately taking their measure. He showed a badge to the charge nurse. She pointed him toward the trauma wing. He walked in, assessed the room in about 3 seconds, and then his gaze landed on Avery. He stopped. Not the polite stop of someone recognizing an acquaintance. A full, involuntary stop, the kind that happens when your body processes something before your brain catches up. Avery felt it. She didn't let herself look directly at him. She kept her eyes on the IV line she was adjusting, but she felt the shift in the room's atmosphere the way you feel a change in air pressure. Not something you see, just something that arrives. "Who is the primary nurse on this patient?" the man asked. "I am," Avery said. She turned around. The man's name was Colonel Harlan Breck, though she didn't know that yet. What she knew was the expression on his face, because she had seen versions of it before, the specific look of someone who has been operating on a set of facts for years and has just discovered that one of those facts was wrong. "What's your name?" he asked. "Avery Cross. I'm the night shift charge nurse. The attending physician is Dr. Ellery if you need a status update on Commander Vane's condition." "I know the commander's condition," Breck said. He was still looking at her with that expression. "I'd like to speak with you privately. I'm in the middle of a patient assessment. It can wait 5 minutes." His BP was 60 over 40 45 minutes ago. Nothing about this patient's status can wait 5 minutes. She looked at him steadily. "Whatever you need to tell me, you can tell me here." Something shifted in Breck's face. Not irritation, something more complicated. "Right," he said finally. "We'll come back to this." He moved to the bedside and looked down at the commander, and Avery turned back to the IV line and told herself not to think too hard about the way her hands had almost, for just a moment, felt like they might shake. She didn't make it to the end of her shift. At 4:15 a.m., she was paged to the administrative floor. Not a request, a summons, the kind that came with a note in the paging system that said immediately and meant something had already been decided before she arrived. She told the ward clerk to watch Commander Vane's monitors and took the elevator up. Roland Harker was waiting for her. He was the kind of administrator who had probably started his career with decent intentions and had arrived at his current form through 20 years of small accommodations, each one individually defensible, collectively amounting to something else. He was 56, heavy-set, with a face that had learned to project authority as a substitute for earning it. He wore his title, Chief Administrative Officer, Hargrove General, like a man who had paid too much for a suit and needed you to notice. He was not alone. The hospital's legal counsel, a woman named Patricia Marsh, sat to his left with a closed folder, and an expression that suggested she had been up for a while. There was also a man Avery didn't recognize, 50s, sharp eyes, the kind of face that processed things quickly and revealed nothing. "Sit down, Ms. Cross," Harker said. She sat. "You're aware," he began, "that tonight's incident in the trauma bay involved a number of procedural irregularities. The patient presented with cardiac arrest. I directed the gurney to the appropriate bay. You redirected medical transport contrary to the instructions of the charge coordinator. The charge coordinator directed the patient to a bay with compromised equipment. I redirected to Bay 1. That's your characterization of events." He opened a folder. "The charge coordinator has filed a report indicating that you were disruptive, that you interfered with the physician-led assessment, and that your intervention created confusion at a critical moment." Avery looked at him. "With respect," she said, "Commander Vane is alive." Harker's expression didn't change. "You also administered medication outside the attending's order sequence. I drew medication in anticipation of the attending's next order. It was administered on Dr. Ellery's instruction 60 seconds after I prepared it. That's not the sequence documented in the chart. Then the chart is incomplete." Patricia Marsh looked up from her folder, just briefly. Harker closed his file. "Ms. Cross, I've reviewed your employment file. You've been with Hargrove for 3 years. In that time, you have received 4 written notes regarding communication issues with senior staff, 2 regarding procedural variants, and 1 formal caution regarding unauthorized access to the pharmaceutical dispensary. I reported a dispensary discrepancy to the pharmacy supervisor and was told to log it under my badge number while they investigated. That's documented. What's also documented," Harker said, "is a pattern of behavior that suggests you have difficulty operating within the structure of this institution." He leaned back. "Tonight's events, particularly given the profile of the patient involved and the attention that's likely to follow, require us to take a conservative position." She knew what was coming. She had known it was coming from the moment the page arrived. "Replacing you on immediate administrative leave pending a full review. Security will escort you from the building within the hour. Your access credentials will be suspended as of this meeting." The room was quiet. "You're removing me," Avery said, "from the care of a patient who is not yet stable. Dr. Ellery is entirely capable of—" "Commander Vane has a left side injury that was partially dressed in the field. The nature of that injury has not been fully assessed. I flagged this in his intake notes." She leaned forward slightly. "If that injury involves what I think it involves, and his BP drops again, Dr. Ellery will not recognize what he's looking at in time. That's a significant claim. It's in the intake notes. Anyone can read it." "Ms. Cross," Harker's voice had the particular flatness of a man ending a conversation. "You're a night shift nurse. You've done your job tonight. Now let the physicians do theirs." She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she stood up, and she left the room, and she did not let any of it reach her face. The security officer assigned to escort her was a young man named Travis, who had the decency to look uncomfortable about the whole thing. He offered to carry her bag. She declined. He apologized twice for no stated reason. She told him it wasn't his fault, which was true, and he seemed grateful for the absolution. They took the back stairwell to avoid the main corridor, which she understood was for the hospital's benefit and not hers. Fewer staff to see the night nurse being walked out, fewer questions to manage in the morning. She had picked up her jacket from the locker room and her bag from the nurse's station and said nothing to anyone except Greta, who had been sitting at the station and who looked up with the wide, helpless expression of someone watching something wrong happen and not knowing how to stop it. "The man in Bay 1, Avery said quietly. "Left side secondary dressing. Make sure someone checks it every 20 minutes. If his systolic drops below 90, page Ellery immediately. Don't wait. Avery, 20 minutes, okay?" Greta nodded. Avery walked out. The parking lot at Hargrove General at 5 in the morning had a particular quality of emptiness. Not peaceful, just vacant, the absence of people rather than the presence of quiet. The air was cold in the way that late autumn air is cold in Del Monte, which is to say, thoroughly and without apology. She sat in her car and did not start it. She had been fired before. Not fired, suspended, technically, pending review, which in hospital administration was often a polite staging area for termination. She knew the mechanics of it. She was not unacquainted with the experience of being asked to leave a room she had earned the right to be in. What she was less accustomed to was the specific feeling of having walked away from a patient who was not yet safe, and she sat with that feeling in the cold parking lot and breathed through it with the deliberate, measured practice of someone who had learned that breathing was often the only variable you could actually control. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She looked at it for a moment. Answered. "Ms. Cross," Colonel Breck's voice. "I understand you've been asked to leave the building." "That's accurate." "I'd like you to know that request did not originate with us." "That's not particularly useful information at the moment, Colonel." A pause. "How did you know my rank?" "Your posture," she said, "and the way the other two positioned themselves when you moved. Stay left of the entrance, both of them. That's a protective reflex, not a collegial one." Another pause, longer. "Ms. Cross, I need to ask you something directly." "Go ahead." "The patient in Bay 1, the secondary injury on his left side, you flagged something in the intake notes. What do you think you're dealing with?" She looked through the windshield at the hospital's lit windows. "I think he was in a detonation event within the last 72 hours, she said, "possibly longer. The primary blast injury was treated in the field or at a forward facility. What's presenting now is a delayed vascular response. It's not common, and it's not something most civilian trauma teams are going to recognize before it becomes a problem." The silence on the other end of the phone was the particular kind that isn't nothing. It's the sound of someone processing something they didn't expect to hear from the source it came from. "That's a very specific assessment," Breck said. "Yes." "For a night shift nurse?" "Yes." "Ms. Cross." His voice had shifted, not warmer exactly, more careful. "I think we need to have a conversation about who you are. I think," she said, "you need to go back inside and make sure someone is checking Commander Vane's BP every 20 minutes. She ended the call, sat in the parking lot. The sky was beginning to lighten at the edges, the specific gray of early morning that isn't sunrise yet, just the night retreating. She watched the hospital windows and thought about the secondary dressing and thought about the 45-second window between the point at which that kind of vascular injury became visible on the monitors and the point at which it stopped being survivable. And she thought about whether Greta would actually push Ellery to check, or whether the intimidation of his position would make her wait until she was sure, and by then, her phone buzzed again. This time it was Greta. His BP just dropped. 88/52. Ellery can't figure out why. There's something wrong with the left side. Avery was already out of the car. Batit. She didn't go through the front entrance. There was a side access door near the loading dock that took a badge to open, a badge that had been deactivated 40 minutes ago. But the door also had a faulty secondary latch that she had reported twice to facilities and which had not been fixed because facilities at Hargrove General operated on a timeline that bore no relationship to urgency. The latch gave on the second push. She took the stairs, not the elevator. Third floor, east wing, and she was moving fast now in the way she had learned to move. Not running, because running attracted attention, and attention cost you time, but the deliberate high-speed walk of someone with a destination and no interest in being stopped. She heard them before she reached the bay. Ellery's voice, and the specific register of controlled panic that physicians developed when they were confronted with something they didn't recognize and couldn't admit they didn't recognize. "His pressure keeps dropping, and I don't have a clear etiology. Someone get radiology on the phone." She pushed through the bay doors. Ellery turned. His face went through several things rapidly: surprise, irritation, and something else that she didn't have time to interpret. "You're not supposed to be she left side," she said, moving past him to the bedside. "The secondary dressing. Let me see it." "Ms. Cross, you have been placed on administrative." "Dr. Ellery." She looked at him directly. "You have approximately 3 minutes before this patient's pressure drops to a point where you lose the window. I need to see the secondary dressing. You can file whatever report you want afterward." He stared at her. She stared back. Then he stepped aside. The secondary dressing was holding on the surface, but the tissue around it had changed in the last 2 hours. Subtle discoloration, slight tension in the surrounding muscle, the kind of thing that didn't announce itself loudly enough to catch a busy physician's eye during a hectic resuscitation, but that read clearly to someone who knew what she was looking for. "This is compartment involvement," she said. "It's building from the blast pressure. He needs a fasciotomy shut. Not eventually. Not after imaging. Now." "That's a surgical procedure," Ellery said. "Yes." "You're a nurse." "I know the procedure." "That is absolutely not," the monitor alarmed. BP 78/46. The room went very still for 1 second, and in that 1 second, Avery made a decision that she had, on some level, been making and unmaking for 3 years. And then she stopped unmaking it. "Get me a surgical kit," she said, "and get Ellery's hands because he's going to be the one of record on this." "Tell me what I need to talk you through," she said to Ellery directly, with a precision and authority in her voice that belonged to someone else's life. "And I'll tell you." Ellery looked at her face. Whatever he saw there, he stopped arguing. "Greta," he said quietly. "Surgical kit, Bay 1. Now." Colonel Breck arrived back in the trauma wing at 5:22 a.m. to find a surgical procedure in progress. A night shift nurse he had been told to escort off the premises, giving real-time guidance to the chief of trauma surgery, and Commander Derek Vane's blood pressure, which 20 minutes ago had been in free fall, climbing back toward something that looked cautiously like survival. He stood in the doorway. One of the men with him leaned close and said something quietly. Breck didn't respond immediately. He was watching Avery cross his hands, the steadiness of them, the economy of motion, the complete absence of hesitation in how she worked. He had seen hands move like that before. He knew exactly where he had seen it. He pulled out his phone and made a call, and the person who answered picked up on the first ring, which meant they had been waiting. "Pull the file," Breck said quietly. "The one from the Kessler operation, the field medic. I need it right now." A pause on the other end. "Sir, that file is classified under a protective identity order. I know what it's classified under. Pull it." He kept watching her work. "I'm standing in front of her," he said into the phone. "Pull the file." The line went quiet for a long moment, and then the voice on the other end said very carefully, "Sir, that identity was sealed because the operative was declared KYA." "I know," Breck said. He watched Avery Cross guide Ellery's hands through the final stage of the procedure with the quiet, precise authority of someone who had done this. Not something like this, but this, in conditions that made a hospital bay look like a controlled laboratory environment. "She's not dead," he said. The file arrived on Breck's phone at 5:31 a.m. Not the full document, just the header and the photograph, which was all he needed. He looked at the photograph. He looked at the woman at the bedside. The hair was different. The face had changed the way faces change when years have carried weight through them. But the jaw was the same, and the eyes were the same, and the way she held herself under pressure was exactly, precisely, unmistakably the same. Lieutenant Mara Voss. Declared killed in action, 14 months after the Kessler operation. Closed casket. Full military honors. A name on a wall. Standing in Bay 1 of Hargrove General Hospital in Delmont, guiding a trauma surgeon's hands through a procedure she should not, by any record that existed in any official database, have been alive to perform. Breck put the phone in his pocket and watched the monitor, and did not move. The procedure took 31 minutes. Not elegant, not clean. Ellery's hands shook twice in the first 10 minutes, and the second time Avery said quietly and without inflection, "Steady, you're ahead of it. Keep the plane." And he steadied, and they kept going. The kit wasn't ideal. A trauma-based surgical kit was built for emergency access, not the kind of sustained precision this required. And Avery worked with what was there the way someone works with what's there when there isn't anything else. Vane's pressure climbed to 94/60 by the 20-minute mark. Not good, but no longer catastrophic. By the time Ellery placed the final closure, it was sitting at 101/68 and trending upward with a consistency that meant something real, not a monitor fluctuation. Avery stepped back from the bedside. Her hands were gloved, and her gloves had blood on them, and she was aware suddenly of how tired she was. Not physically, exactly, but the specific exhaustion of concentration sustained past the point where it should have been possible. She stripped the gloves. She pressed them into the disposal bin. She stood there for a moment with her eyes on the monitor and let herself confirm one more time that the number was real. Then she became aware of how quiet the room was. Greta was near the supply cart with her arms folded across her chest, watching Avery with an expression that had moved past confusion into something raw and harder to name. The respiratory tech was still at her station, but she had turned entirely to face the bay, and the orderly near the door had that particular stillness of someone who has just witnessed something they know they're going to be describing for years. Dr. Ellery was washing his hands at the sink. His back was to the room. He had not spoken in 7 minutes. Colonel Breck was still in the doorway. "Ms. Cross," he said. She turned. He was looking at her with the file photo on his phone, and he didn't show it to her, but he held the phone in a way that told her it was there, and she looked at him and understood that the particular calculation she had been running for 3 years, the one that involved staying quiet and staying small and staying Avery Cross from Delmont, had just run out of runway. "I think," she said, "we should speak privately." "Yes," he said. "I think we should." There was a family consultation room at the end of the east wing that was usually empty at this hour, a beige room with a fake plant and chairs that had been chosen for neutrality rather than comfort. Breck closed the door. The 2 men who had come in with him remained outside, which she noted. She sat. He didn't. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Since about an hour ago," he said. "The procedure confirmed it. I suspected before that, when I saw you in the bay." He paused. "You have a tell." "I know. The way you hold your offhand when you're working. Your right hand does the work, your left hand stays open at 45 degrees. Every field medic trained under Caldwell drills do that." She didn't say anything. "Lieutenant Voss, my name is Avery Cross. I'm aware that's your current name." He said it carefully, not as a challenge. "I'm also aware that you were Mara Voss before that, and that you were declared killed in action following an incident in—" "I know what I was declared." He sat down then. He put his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor for a moment like he was deciding something, and then he looked back up at her. "I'm not here to expose you. I want you to understand that. You're here because your commander is in my hospital. He's in your hospital because he was being transferred to a facility in Meridian, and something went wrong en route. We weren't planning to come through Delmont." He paused. "You weren't supposed to be part of this. And yet, he exhaled. "The injury you identified, the fasciotomy. How did you know what you were looking at?" "I've seen it before." "In what context?" She looked at him steadily. "In a context that's in the same file you just pulled up on your phone." He was quiet for a moment. "The Kessler operation. I'm not confirming or denying anything about an operation." "Mara, Avery." He stopped, started again. "Avery, I've spent 14 months believing you were dead. Half the people who were in that op spent 14 months believing you were dead. Vane himself, he wrote the report. He submitted the KIA documentation personally." Something moved through her face that she didn't entirely manage to contain. "I know what Derek submitted. He's been carrying that. That wasn't my decision." "Whose decision was it?" She didn't answer. Breck sat back. He looked at the ceiling. He had the expression of a man doing rapid recalculation on something he thought he'd understood. "Someone pulled you out," he said finally. "After the incident, someone moved you under a protected identity and buried the file." Still, she said nothing. Someone at a level where they could make a KIA declaration stick and keep it stuck for 14 months. Silence. "Okay," he said. He wasn't pushing anymore. Something in his posture had changed. Less interrogation, more resignation, the acceptance of a man who has reached the edge of what he's going to get right now. "Okay, then let me tell you what my immediate problem is." He leaned forward. "Vane is stable for the moment, but he needs level 4 trauma care that Hargrove isn't equipped to provide long term. I need to move him within the next 12 hours. And before I move him, I need to be confident about what else might be presenting." The fasciotomy addressed the immediate pressure. But there may be a secondary vascular response if the blast event was within 60 hours. You need imaging that assesses the intercostal structures on that side, and you need someone reading those images who knows what they're looking for. Does Hargrove have that capability? The imaging equipment, yes. Someone qualified to interpret the results in this specific context. She stopped. No, but you could. Oh, she looked at him. You could interpret those images, he said. I'm not asking you to perform a surgery. I'm asking you to look at images and tell me what you see. I've been suspended from this hospital. I'm aware. I don't have active clinical credentials beyond my nursing license. I'm aware of that too. Then you're asking me to practice medicine without a license inside a facility that just escorted me off the premises. I'm asking you, he said carefully, to help keep a man alive. The legal architecture of the situation is a problem I will handle. She looked at the fake plant in the corner. The pot it was in had a crack in it that someone had covered with a piece of tape that had been there long enough to yellow. I need 2 hours of uninterrupted access to the imaging suite, she said, and I need Ellery out of my way. I can manage Ellery. You can manage Ellery? I have resources that tend to make hospital administrators and physicians manageable, he said, with the flat practicality of someone who has deployed those resources before and doesn't feel the need to elaborate. She stood up. Then let's not waste time. What happened next was the part of the morning that Greta would describe to her sister 2 weeks later as the part where everything started to feel like a different movie. Colonel Breck made 3 phone calls in the hallway, outside the consultation room. Avery didn't hear the calls, but she watched his face through the window as he made them, and the face of a man making those calls looked nothing like the face of a man asking for permission. It looked like the face of a man informing people of decisions that had already been made. By 6:15 a.m., there was a new energy in the east wing of Hargrove General. 2 additional men in the too tight civilian clothes had arrived, posted at intervals that weren't quite visible from the main nursing station but were clearly deliberate. A woman Avery didn't recognize, late 30s, short hair, the specific alertness of someone whose job involved a great deal of quiet watching, had set up a workstation near the imaging suite entrance without anyone apparently having told her to. Dr. Ellery, when he came out of the staff lounge at 6:30, found Colonel Breck waiting for him in the corridor. Avery was far enough away that she couldn't hear what was said. What she could see was the progression of Ellery's expression. Initial irritation, then careful attention, then the very specific neutrality of a man who has just been informed that the situation he is in is considerably larger than the situation he thought he was in. When Breck walked away, Ellery stood in the corridor for a moment. Then he looked down the hall toward Avery, and his expression was not warm, but it was not what it had been 3 hours ago. It was something more uncertain than that. He didn't try to stop her when she went into the imaging suite. The scans took 40 minutes to run. She read them for 20. The intercostal structure on the left was intact, which was the good news. The bad news was a shadow in the imaging that she had to look at twice before she was certain of what it was. A slow extravascular bleed, small enough that it hadn't registered on the BP trends yet, sitting in a location that meant it would register badly when it did. Another 4 to 6 hours without intervention, and they would be having a different conversation entirely. She came out of the imaging suite and found Breck in the hallway. There's a secondary bleed, she said. Small, but positioned wrong. He needs an interventional radiology procedure before transfer. Breck looked at her for one beat. Can Hargrove do it? They have the equipment. You'll need a vascular surgeon. The best one here is Dr. Nadia Oseim. She's not on shift, but she can be reached. Who contacts her? Ellery should. It needs to come through the clinical chain so it's properly documented. She paused. But someone should be standing next to Ellery when he makes the call. The corner of Breck's mouth moved, barely. I'll stand next to Ellery. He had turned to go when she said, Breck? He stopped. The administrative action against me. Harker. Whatever he's trying to do, it needs to be on hold until Vane is stable. After that, I don't care. But right now, I need to be able to move through this building without someone stopping me every 6 minutes. Breck looked at her with the expression of a man who was being told something he had already arranged. Your access credentials were reinstated at 6:04 a.m. She blinked. How? The hospital's legal counsel, he said. She's very responsive when the right people make the right calls. He walked away. Avery stood in the corridor and thought about Patricia Marsh sitting in that meeting room at 4:15 a.m. with her closed folder and her careful expression, and thought about the very different closed folder that had apparently been presented to her sometime in the last 90 minutes, and felt the particular disorientation of a situation accelerating past the pace at which she had calibrated herself to operate. She had spent 3 years moving slowly, deliberately, under the radar. The radar was gone. Roland Harker arrived at the hospital at 7:45 a.m., later than usual, which suggested he had spent some time in the morning dealing with communications that had reached him at home before he reached the office. He came through the main entrance with the expression of a man arriving to manage a situation, and found, instead, a lobby that contained 2 military personnel, a woman at a workstation who looked at him as he passed with the unhurried attention of someone cataloging information, and Patricia Marsh standing directly in front of the elevator with a folder held against her chest. "Pat," he said, "what's happening? I need to speak with you before you go upstairs. I've been getting calls since 6 this morning. Is this about the vein situation?" "It's about a number of things." Her voice was even. She had known Harker for 9 years, which meant she was very good at not letting him read her. "Come to the conference room. I have a meeting at Roland." Something in her tone stopped him. "Come to the conference room." He followed her. Avery was not in the conference room and did not see what happened there. What she learned later, from Greta, who had a source in administration the way good nurses always had sources in administration, was that the meeting lasted 22 minutes. That at some point during those 22 minutes, Harker's voice got loud enough to be audible in the adjacent office. That by the time the door opened and he walked out, whatever loudness had been in his voice had been replaced by something quieter and more controlled, the kind of quiet that a man produces when he is doing the calculation of how much trouble he is currently in. What Avery did see, at 8:10 a.m., was Harker walking past the nursing station on the 3rd floor, and the specific way he looked at her as he passed, not the dismissive non-look of the administrator who had sat across from her 4 hours ago, but a careful measuring look, the look of a man reassessing an adversary he had underestimated. She was checking Vane's vitals. She didn't stop checking them. He walked past. She heard him stop. "Miss Cross?" His voice had a different texture than it had in the conference room at 4:15. Not friendly, not apologetic, but careful in a way it hadn't been. "I understand you've been providing assistance with the patient in Bay 1. "I have." "That assistance is—" He paused for what felt like a calibrated amount of time. "Appreciated." She looked up at him then. She held his gaze for exactly as long as she needed to, which was long enough for him to understand that she was not confused about what was happening and was not grateful for the word appreciated. Then she looked back at the monitor. "I have a patient to attend to," she said. He left. Greta appeared at her elbow 30 seconds later. "Was that? Did he just—" "Don't read too much into it," Avery said. "He's managing his position. It doesn't mean anything's changed." But even as she said it, she was thinking about Breck's phone calls, and Patricia Marsh's folder, and the woman at the workstation in the lobby who looked at people the way people looked at people when they were building a file. And she was thinking that maybe some things had changed and she was still too close to the center of it to see the whole shape. Dr. Nadia Osei arrived at Hargrove General at 9:20 a.m. with the composed urgency of a surgeon who has been called in on her day off before and has developed a productive relationship with that fact. She was 43, precise in her movements, and she had the quality that the best surgeons had: the ability to walk into a complicated situation, absorb it quickly, and begin working without spending time on the drama of the complication. She reviewed the imaging. She reviewed Avery's notes, which Breck had apparently shared with her en route, though Avery had not been consulted on that decision and found out about it only when Osei introduced herself and said, "Your read on the extravascular bleed was correct. I'm glad someone caught it." "The equipment did most of the work," Avery said. Osei looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not quite skeptical and not quite impressed. "Right," she said, and went to scrub in. The interventional procedure took just over an hour. Avery was not in the room for it. She had no standing to be, and Osei's team was capable, and she knew it. But she was at the nursing station within earshot, and she tracked the procedural updates the way she had always tracked things she cared about, quietly, without appearing to. Vane's pressure held through the procedure and stabilized afterward at numbers that were, for the first time since he had come through those bay doors, genuinely reassuring rather than provisionally acceptable. It was 10:47 a.m. when Osei came out. "He's resting," she said to Breck, who had been in the corridor for the duration. "The bleed is sealed. He's going to need monitoring for the next 24 hours before I'd feel comfortable with transfer, but the immediate crisis is managed." Breck nodded. He looked down the corridor to where Avery was writing in a chart, her back partially to them. "What's the full assessment of her work tonight?" he asked Osei. Not loudly, but not quietly enough. Osei glanced down the corridor. "Which procedure, the fasciotomy or the imaging read?" "Either. Both." Osei considered this with the directness of a surgeon who did not soften professional assessments for social comfort. The fasciotomy guidance was textbook level, better than textbook, because she was working with suboptimal tools and a surgeon who needed support. The imaging interpretation was accurate, and given the subtlety of the presentation, impressively fast. She paused. "She has a clinical background that her employment record doesn't account for." "I'm aware." "You want to tell me what her actual background is?" "Not yet," Breck said. Osei looked at him with the expression of a woman who has been given a non-answer she was expecting. "Right," she said again, and went to find coffee. Prompt. Avery was in the medication room at 11:30 when Greta found her. The medication room was one of the few places in the hospital that had a door that closed all the way and a small window that looked out onto the service road rather than the interior corridors, which made it the unofficial thinking space for the night staff. Avery was standing at the counter with a cup of cold coffee she had not drunk and the particular expression of someone running through a series of scenarios. "Hey," Greta said, and closed the door behind her. "Hey, are you okay?" "I'm fine." Greta leaned against the shelving unit and folded her arms. She was 26, second year at Hargrove, quick and observant and smart enough to know when she was being given a short answer in lieu of a real one. "You want to know what I've been hearing?" "Probably." "Parker's been in Patricia's office twice since 9. Someone from, I think it's Federal, based on the badge, someone from Federal was in the administrative wing this morning asking for access to equipment maintenance records." She paused. "Equipment maintenance records. Not patient files. Not clinical records. Equipment records." Avery was still. "And there's a woman downstairs who's been asking the facilities manager very pointed questions about the defibrillator certification logs." Avery set down the coffee cup. "Greta," she said, "how long have the Bay 3 defibrillator pads been expired?" Greta thought about it. "Since I started, at minimum. So at least 4 months. And when you check the certification board in the supply closet, the one that's supposed to be updated monthly, it was current. Everything logged current." Greta's eyes had changed. She was doing the same arithmetic. But the pads were expired, which means the log was updated without the equipment being updated. "Oh, that's a falsified maintenance record." "Yes," Avery said. "It is." The medication room was quiet for a moment. "How much else do you think there is?" Greta asked. Avery thought about 3 years of night shifts, 3 years of quiet discrepancies she had logged, flagged, reported, and watched disappear into the administrative structure like stones dropped into deep water. The dispensary report. The equipment variant she had noted 6 months ago in the West Wing crash cart. The biomedical certification she had questioned on the portable monitoring units and been told she was misreading. "I don't know," she said, but she thought she had a reasonable estimate. The call came at 12:15 p.m. Breck found her in the corridor outside Bay 1 and said, "I need you in the administrative conference room. Now." "What's happened?" "Harker happened. He's called an emergency board session. He's positioning it as a patient safety concern, using the unauthorized procedures this morning as the frame." Breck's voice was carefully flat. "He's requesting your immediate termination and is talking about filing a complaint with the state nursing board." Avery absorbed this. "He's moving fast," she said. "He knows something is coming for him and he wants to reframe the story before it arrives. If he can make today about you, the night nurse who performed unauthorized procedures on a military patient without proper credentials, then whatever else surfaces gets contextualized through that lens. And if I'm discredited before the equipment records come out, then your previous reports become the complaints of a reckless, terminated employee rather than documented evidence. He looked at her. He's not stupid. No, she said. He's not. She thought about the beige conference room she'd been in 8 hours ago, and the flat finality of Harker's voice when he told her she was a night shift nurse who had done her job, and the way Patricia Marsh had looked at her folder without quite meeting Avery's eyes. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Right now, nothing," Breck said. "There are people in that conference room who are going to handle the immediate situation, but I want you present." "Why?" He looked at her for a moment, and for the first time since 2:47 a.m., his expression was something she didn't quite have a category for. Not tactical. Something more personal than that. "Because," he said, "I spent 14 months thinking you were dead, and because Derek Vane is going to wake up in the next few hours. And when he does, the first person he asks about is going to be you, and it's been a long time since that man has had good news, and I'd rather he hear it from someone who can tell him the truth." Avery looked at him. "What do you mean the first person he asks about will be me?" Breck was quiet for a moment. "After the Kessler operation," he said, "before the incident, there was a field report. Vane wrote it personally." He paused. "He listed your actions in detail. He put you in for a commendation. The whole thing got buried with everything else when the political situation went sideways, but the report exists." He looked at her steadily. "He never stopped trying to find out what happened to you." The corridor was very quiet. From behind the door of Bay 1 came the soft, steady sound of a heart monitor. "He's going to have questions," Avery said finally. "Yes. I'm not going to be able to answer all of them." "I know." She looked at the bay door for a moment. Then she looked at Breck. "Conference room first," she said. He nodded. They walked. And behind them, in Bay 1, the heart monitor kept its steady beat, and the man it was tracking was beginning, slowly and unevenly, to surface from the deep, sedated dark. Vital signs climbing, awareness assembling itself from scattered pieces. And in approximately 40 minutes, he would open his eyes, and the first word he would say, in a voice rough from the tube and barely above a whisper, was not "where am I?" and not what happened, but a name. A name that was not the name she was using. A name no one in this hospital had heard before today. A name that, once spoken aloud, was going to change every calculation that Roland Harker thought he had made. The conference room on the 4th floor of Hargrove General was not a large room, but by the time Avery and Breck arrived, it had accumulated the specific density of a space where too many agendas had been compressed into too small a place. Harker was already seated at the head of the table, and he had brought his full apparatus with him, Patricia Marsh to his left, a man from the board. Avery recognized vaguely as the chair two people she didn't know who had the look of outside legal counsel, and Dr. Ellery, who was sitting near the window with his hands folded on the table and the expression of a man who had decided his primary objective was to survive whatever happened next without being the one holding the bag. Breck entered first. Avery followed. Harker looked at her the way you look at something you've already decided you know the value of. "Ms. Cross, I wasn't expecting you to attend in person. Colonel Breck invited me." "But Colonel Breck is a guest of this facility and does not have the authority to—" "Roland." The man from the board, his name was Whitfield, she remembered now, board chair for 4 years, a retired attorney who had moved into nonprofit governance with the energy of someone who needed somewhere to put his organizational instincts, spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had been in rooms like this longer than most people in this room had been alive. "Let's get to what we're actually here to discuss." Harker settled. Not willingly. What followed was 20 minutes of procedural ugliness. Harker laid out his case methodically. Unauthorized clinical procedures, breach of suspension protocol, potential liability for anything that had gone wrong during the morning's interventions, questions about the patient's informed consent under sedation, questions about whether Avery's involvement constituted unlicensed practice of medicine. He used words like reckless and pattern of behavior and institutional confidence. and he used them with the precision of someone who had prepared this speech before he got to the building. Avery sat through it. She had a particular capacity for sitting through things. She had developed it over years and across circumstances that made this conference room look like a very comfortable kind of difficult. And she sat with her hands on the table and her face composed and let him finish. When he finished, Whitfield looked at Breck. "Colonel." Breck opened a folder. It was a thin folder which was deceptive because the documents inside it were the kind of documents that didn't need volume to carry weight. He slid a single page to the center of the table. "That," he said, "is a federal preservation order on all equipment maintenance records, calibration logs, safety certifications, and procurement documentation for Hargrove General Hospital dating back 4 years. It was issued at 9:47 this morning." He slid a second page. "That is a formal request for cooperation from the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General, which has been investigating Hargrove's equipment compliance records for the past 6 weeks as part of a broader review of several regional facilities." The room was quiet. "6 weeks," Patricia Marsh said. Her voice was very careful. "6 weeks," Breck confirmed. "Ms. Cross was not the origin point of that investigation. She is, however, one of several individuals whose internal reports are included in the evidentiary file." He looked at Harker. "Your maintenance logs show current compliance across all resuscitation equipment. The equipment itself does not reflect current compliance. Someone updated the logs without updating the equipment, and they did it across a consistent pattern over at least 18 months. Harker's face had not moved. He was very good at keeping his face from moving, but his right hand, Avery noticed, had shifted from the table to his lap. "This is not a clinical conduct hearing," Breck said. "It was framed as one. I'm suggesting it shouldn't continue to be framed that way because the framing creates a record that is going to look very specific in the context of a federal investigation." Whitfield was looking at Harker. Harker was looking at the preservation order. "I think," Whitfield said slowly, "we should adjourn this meeting." "I agree," Patricia Marsh said, and the speed with which she said it told Avery everything she needed to know about where Patricia Marsh's loyalties had been repositioning themselves over the last 7 hours. Harker looked up. His eyes found Avery, and for one moment the composure cracked just enough to show what was underneath it, which was not remorse and was not surprise, but was the specific cold calculation of a man deciding whether he still had a play. He didn't say anything. He stood up, and he left the room. And 2 of the people who had come with him did not follow immediately, which was its own kind of answer. Avery was in the corridor outside the conference room, alone for the first time in what felt like a very long time, when her pager went off. Bay 1. Nurse station flag. She was moving before she had consciously decided to move. The stairs were faster than the elevator, and she took them without thinking about it. 3rd floor, east wing, and she could hear it before she reached the bay. Not the alarm sound of a crisis, but voices, more than one, urgent without being panicked, which was its own specific category of concerning. Greta met her in the doorway. "He's awake." "What's his status?" "BP's okay. Heart rate's a little elevated, but within range. He came up about 15 minutes ago, disoriented, then more coherent. He's been asking for someone." Greta looked at her. "He keeps saying a name. We don't know who he means." Avery walked past her into the bay. Derek Vane was not how she had last seen him. He was conscious now. Not fully, not the clear consciousness of a rested person, but the effortful, blinking consciousness of a man clawing his way back from a long distance. His face was worse in daylight than it had been under the emergency lights. Older, harder, marked by the kind of accumulated damage that years of living at high cost left behind. There was a scar along his jaw that hadn't been there before. His hands on the blanket were the hands of someone who had spent decades doing physical work and carried the record of it in every joint. He turned his head when she entered. His eyes took a moment to focus. Then they did. The room was not silent. The monitor was beeping. Greta was at the station. Someone was in the corridor. But it felt silent in the way specific moments feel silent when the surrounding noise becomes irrelevant. "I thought I was dreaming," he said. His voice was rough, low, a voice dragged through a long tunnel. "When I was under, I heard your voice." She stood at the bedside. "You weren't dreaming," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. There was so much in that look. Too much to read cleanly, too many layers accumulated over too much time. And she didn't try to read all of it. She let it be what it was. "They told me you were dead," he said. "I know. I wrote the report myself. He stopped. Something moved through his face. "I thought I was writing the truth." "You were writing what you were given," she said. "That wasn't your fault." Avery," she said, gently. "Here, right now, I'm Avery." He closed his eyes for a moment, opened them. "Avery." He said it like someone testing the weight of a word. "How long?" 3 years at this hospital, a little longer before that, in a different city." "Did anyone know?" "No one who was supposed to know." He exhaled slowly. "Someone moved you." "Yes. Someone above my level." She didn't confirm or deny it, which was its own kind of confirmation. "I spent 14 months, he said, and then he stopped. And the thing he didn't finish saying was in the room with them anyway, taking up space. I put you in for a commendation, after Kessler. The whole thing got buried, but I put it in." "Breck told me." "Breck's here?" "He's been here since 3 in the morning. He's the reason you're still alive. He made the calls that got the right people into this building." She paused. "You did the rest. You're harder to kill than you used to be." Something crossed his face that was close to a smile and not quite. "That's a low bar." "It's the bar we're working with." He was quiet for a moment. His hand moved slightly on the blanket, not reaching toward her, just a small movement. The kind that happens when someone has more to say than their body currently has the energy to deliver. "There's a situation," he said finally, "outside this hospital. The transfer was supposed to be routine, but something went wrong, and I think it's connected to—" He stopped. His jaw tightened. "How much do you know about what I was doing before I came in?" "Nothing specific. I know the blast injury presentation. I know it wasn't incidental." It wasn't. His eyes had sharpened. The sedation was wearing off faster than it should have been. Or maybe he had always metabolized it quickly. She remembered that about him, the way he came back from things faster than anyone expected. "There's a file. Classified. It was being transported with me. If the transfer was compromised, Breck should know this. Breck might already know it. Or Breck might be the reason I need to know it." He looked at her directly. "I don't know who I can trust in this building right now. I know I can trust you." She looked at him. The monitor beside him was steady. His vitals were holding. He was coherent and he was scared, and the fear was not the personal kind. It was the operational kind. The fear of someone who has carried information that matters and is no longer sure it's safe. "I'll get Breck," she said, "and I'll be in the room when you talk to him." "Okay. But first," she picked up his chart, checked his numbers. "You need to drink some water and let someone check your wound site, because you just survived 2 procedures in 12 hours, and the heroics can wait 10 minutes. He looked at her. "There she is," he said quietly. She didn't answer that. She went to the door and called for Greta, and while she was doing that, she missed the way he kept looking at the space where she'd been standing, with the expression of a man who has been given back something he'd resigned himself to losing. Breck arrived in Bay 1 at 1:40 p.m. The conversation that followed was not one Avery entirely followed. There were references to designations and operation codes that she had no context for, and at least 2 names that clearly meant something to both men and nothing to her. But the shape of it was clear enough. Vane had been transporting documentation related to an ongoing federal inquiry, not the equipment investigation, something larger and older, something with roots in a procurement network that had been running for years under military contract oversight. The transfer had been rerouted at the last minute by someone who had access to the transport schedule. That rerouting had put him in Delmont. That rerouting had nearly killed him. "Someone in the chain knew where you were going," Breck said. "Yes. And changed the route to put you through an area where the nearest major trauma center was 40 minutes out," Vane said. "Not this hospital. A smaller facility with minimal overnight surgical capacity." He paused. "If we'd made that facility instead of being diverted here, you wouldn't have made it," Breck said. His voice was flat. "Not with what was building." The 3 of them sat with that for a moment. Avery thought about the ambulance coming through the bay doors. The paramedic's voice on the vitals, the way the secondary dressing had looked in the low light of the trauma bay, how close the margins had been at every single point since 2 a.m. The documentation, Breck said. Where is it? The transfer team had it. If the team was compromised, the team wasn't compromised. 2 of them are downstairs. They've been here since 4 a.m. waiting. Breck looked at him. The documentation is secure. Vane's shoulders dropped a fraction. Just a fraction. Then we're in a position to move forward. We're in a position, Breck said carefully, but moving forward requires making some decisions about what comes next. He glanced at Avery, and about some things that are going to need to be addressed before this goes any further. She knew what he meant. She had known it was coming since the moment Vane had said her name in that bay. The protected identity, she said. It was issued under circumstances that are now materially changed, Breck said. With the federal inquiry active, with Vane's situation, with what happened this morning, the file is going to surface. It may already be surfacing. There are people who are going to ask questions about who you are, and the answers are going to come out whether you control them or not. She looked at the window, the service road outside, the strip of pale sky above the building across the lot. 3 years of being Avery Cross. 3 years of night shifts and expired defibrillator pads and being called one of the overnight girls and keeping everything she knew behind her eyes where it couldn't get her or anyone else in trouble. If the file surfaces, she said, it changes the investigation. My reports, the equipment logs, the discrepancy records, they look different if I'm identified. They look more credible, Breck said. They also become a target. Anyone who wants to discredit the investigation discredits me first. My background, the circumstances of the identity, the fact that I was operating under a protected name inside a hospital without disclosing my full credentials. All of that can be managed. Can it? He met her eyes. I won't make you a promise I'm not sure I can keep, but I will tell you that there are people above my level who have been waiting for this inquiry to have the kind of anchor it needs. And what happened in this building today is that anchor. He paused. Your reports go back 3 years. Your intake notes from last night are already in the federal file. The morning's procedures are documented. There is a record, and it is a record of someone who did not cut corners and did not look away, and that record is what the investigation needs. She thought about Harker, about the way he'd walked past the nursing station at 8:10 with his new careful look, about the woman downstairs asking about certification logs, building a file one question at a time. There's something else, Vane said. He had been quiet during the exchange, watching. Now he spoke with the deliberate energy of someone managing limited resources. The Kessler file, the original, not the incident report, the operational file. What happened before the incident? Breck looked at him. It's been sealed under a political classification for 4 years, Vane said. But if the inquiry goes where I think it's going to need to be unsealed. And when it is, he looked at Avery. Everything that was buried in it comes back up. Including the commendation, Breck said. Including everything. Vane's eyes were on Avery. Including the reason you were given a protected identity in the first place, which was not because you did something wrong, and I need you to know that I have always known that. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. Outside in the corridor, someone's shoes squeaked on the linoleum. A cart rattled past. The ordinary sounds of a hospital moving through its afternoon while something irrevocable was being decided in one of its bays. Avery looked at Vane, then at Breck, then at the window. Okay, she said. Just that. One word, with everything behind it. Breck nodded. He stood. He took out his phone and stepped toward the door, and Avery heard him say, before he cleared the bay, "Get me a direct line to the OIG field coordinator, and pull the Kessler file. Full operational document, not the summary." A pause. "Yes, now. We have a situation developing." He stepped out. Avery stayed. Vane was watching her with the careful, tired attention of someone who had spent a great deal of energy getting to this room and this moment. "What happens to you now?" he asked. "I don't know yet." "Are you scared?" She considered the question with the honesty it deserved. "I haven't been scared in a long time," she said. "I've been careful. Those aren't the same thing." He was quiet for a moment. Then, the night of the Kessler operation, when everything went sideways, I've thought about it more times than I can count. He looked at his hands. I've thought about what you did, what it cost. Don't. I need to… Derek. She said his name. The real name, the first time she'd used it today, and it stopped him. You can do that later. Right now you need to rest and let the wound site settle, because you are 24 hours out from 2 separate procedures, and your blood pressure is sitting at a number I'm not entirely happy with. He looked at her, the ghost of that almost smile again. You're not going to let me be emotional about this. Not until you're cleared for transfer and someone more qualified than me is monitoring your vitals. He leaned back against the pillow, closed his eyes. You're exactly the same, he said quietly. She didn't answer. She checked the monitor, noted the numbers, started to move toward the door. She was 3 steps from the bay entrance when Breck appeared in it. His face had changed, not the measured professionalism of the last several hours, but something sharper, more immediate. The face of someone who has just received information that reorganizes a situation. We have a problem, he said. What kind? The OIG coordinator I just called. He kept his voice low, but his eyes were alert in a way they hadn't been 90 seconds ago. She's been trying to reach someone inside Hargrove for the past 2 hours. The investigation has been tracking a secondary source, someone inside the hospital who has been forwarding information to the same network that doctored the maintenance logs. Avery went still. Someone inside, not about the equipment, about you. He looked at her. Someone in this building has been running a search on the name Mara Voss since 8:30 this morning. The search went to an external server that the OIG has flagged as part of the procurement network. The corridor behind him felt suddenly different. Same linoleum, same lights, same afternoon sounds. Someone in this building, she said, is looking for me. And they started looking, Breck said, 20 minutes after Vane said your name out loud in the bay. The first thing Avery did was go back into the bay and close the curtain. Not because it offered any real protection. A curtain in a hospital bay was theater, not security, but because it bought 30 seconds of visual separation from the corridor, and 30 seconds was enough to think. We need to move him, she said to Breck, keeping her voice low. Not transfer, just move him within the building. Different room, different wing, no advance notice. If someone in the building is tracking my name, they already know where he is. Bay 1 East Wing is in every intake record from last night. She looked at Vane. He was listening with his eyes open, the sedation fully off now, his face carrying the alert stillness of someone who has spent years in situations where the speed of your thinking was the difference between what happened next. We move him in the next 15 minutes, before whoever is searching has time to do anything with what they've found. Breck looked at the monitor, looked at Vane. He's 24 hours out from 2 procedures. I know. Moving him creates risk. Staying here creates more. She was already at the supply cart, pulling what she needed. I need a portable monitor and a transport wheelchair. He can't do the gurney. Too visible, too slow. Greta. Greta appeared at the curtain edge. She had clearly been hovering, which was the kind of thing Avery had always relied on without acknowledging. The room at the end of the second-floor west corridor, Avery said. The one that's been offline since the renovation. It doesn't have active monitoring set up. It has outlets and it has a wall port for the portable unit. I need it unlocked in 5 minutes. Greta looked between Avery and Breck. Breck nodded once. Greta left. The 2 men from your team, Avery said to Breck. The ones who came in with the transfer. Where are they? Ground floor, near the ambulance bay. Get one of them to the second-floor west corridor and have him watch the stairwell entrance. Nobody through that door who isn't you or me. Breck was already on his phone. Vane pushed himself to sitting with the careful, deliberate effort of a man overriding the signals his body was sending him. His face went gray for a moment, and Avery put a hand on his shoulder without looking at him, the automatic steadying gesture of someone who has talked people through worse than this, and he breathed through it. I'm fine, he said. You're not fine. You're functional. There's a difference. She checked his wound site quickly, clinically, with gloved hands and no ceremony. The closure was holding. The pressure on the surrounding tissue was within range. You can walk 30 meters if you go slow and don't do anything stupid on the way. Define stupid. Anything that isn't walking. He almost smiled again. She was starting to understand that almost smiling was his version of actually smiling, and she filed that away for a reason she didn't examine. The move took 11 minutes. Not elegant. Vane walked it because the wheelchair felt too exposed in the corridor, and he was stubborn enough to make the case convincingly, and Breck flanked him on the right while Avery managed the portable monitor on a rolling stand that had one wheel that stuck intermittently, which she had reported to facilities 8 months ago. They took the back stairwell, one floor down, through a corridor that smelled of fresh paint and construction dust and the particular emptiness of a space that had been stripped back to its bones and not yet rebuilt. The room at the end of the west corridor was small and unglamorous. A single bed, overhead lights that took 3 seconds to warm up, a window that looked onto the inner courtyard rather than the parking lot, which was better, less visible from outside. Avery got the portable monitor connected and running in 4 minutes and checked Vane's numbers, which were worse than she wanted them to be, but not worse than she could work with. His pressure dropped during the walk, she said to Breck, low. How much? 12 points systolic. It'll come back up, but he needs to be still for the next hour. She looked at Vane. That means actually still. Not still while you brief people and plan things. Still. Understood, Vane said, in a tone that suggested he understood the instruction and was deciding how strictly to interpret it. Derek. I said understood. She looked at him for a beat, then at Breck. I need to go back out. Why? Because whoever ran that search is still in the building, and because if they're connected to the procurement network that's under investigation, then they knew more than just my name. They may have been the source of information that helped route Vane's transfer through Delmont. She held Breck's eyes. I've been in this building for 3 years. I know who goes where and when. I know what doesn't fit. Breck looked at her steadily. You're not an investigator. No, but I'm a night shift nurse, which means I've spent 3 years watching this building when the people who run it think nobody's paying attention. She pulled off her gloves. Give me 45 minutes. And if you find something, I'll call you before I do anything with it. He looked at her for a long moment with the expression she was starting to recognize as his version of a calculated risk assessment. Not hesitation, just the habit of a man who had learned to account for variables before committing. 45 minutes, he said. Then I come looking. Tub. She started with the administrative wing, not because she expected to find anything obvious there. Anyone connected to a federal procurement network would have learned, as a baseline condition of survival, not to leave obvious things in obvious places, but because the administrative wing was where the search would have been run, and a search that went to a flagged external server left traces that weren't always just digital. The 4th floor in the early afternoon had the specific quiet of a floor where the morning's crisis has passed and the afternoon's hasn't arrived yet. 2 administrative assistants at their stations. A closed door near the end of the corridor where Harker's office was, with no light visible under the door. Patricia Marsh's office open, empty. Avery moved through the floor the way she had always moved through this building, present without being noticed, purposeful without announcing the purpose. She went to the printer station near the central admin hub, which was where floor-level staff printed documents, but which also stored the network access logs for the floor's shared terminals, because the IT department had set the system up that way, and nobody had ever asked them to change it. She had discovered this 3 months into her employment, and had never told anyone, which had seemed like an unimportant fact until approximately now. The access log for the morning showed 3 terminals active between 8 and 9 a.m. 2 of them had been used for standard document access, patient scheduling, billing records. The third had run 4 searches between 8:24 and 8:51 a.m. And while the log didn't show the content of the searches, it showed the terminal ID and the user badge number associated with the session. She looked at the badge number. She knew it. Not because she had memorized administrative badge assignments, she hadn't, but because she had seen this number before on a report she had filed 18 months ago. A pharmacy dispensary discrepancy. She had logged it under her own badge and been told by the pharmacy supervisor to let the investigation run through normal channels. The person who had signed off on closing that report, the person whose badge number appeared on the closure documentation, was the same badge number that had run the search this morning. His name was Terrence Gall. He was Hargrove General's Director of Operations, a position that existed one layer below Harker in the administrative hierarchy, and that was, in practice, the person who managed the day-to-day mechanics of how the building ran: facilities contracts, equipment procurement, maintenance certification schedules. She stood at the printer station for 2 seconds, and then she walked. Met. Gall's office was on the 3rd floor, administrative annex, a smaller space than his title might have suggested, which she had always taken as an indication that he preferred to operate without a large footprint. She had interacted with him maybe a dozen times in 3 years, always briefly, always in the context of a report being filed or a discrepancy being noted. He was in his early 50s, unremarkable in appearance, the kind of person who had cultivated forgettability the same way she had. She recognized the craft of it now with a clarity she hadn't had before. His office door was closed. She knocked. No answer. She tried the handle, unlocked, which was either carelessness or an indication that he'd left in a hurry, and locking the door hadn't been his first priority. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The office had the particular quality of a space that had been partially cleared, not ransacked, nothing overturned, nothing visibly missing, but the desk surface was cleaner than it should have been for a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of a working week, and the filing cabinet to the left of the desk had one drawer that was not fully closed. She did not touch the filing cabinet. She looked at the desk, at the computer screen, locked, dark, and at the recycling bin beside the desk, which had been emptied recently, but not recently enough, because at the bottom of it was a torn piece of paper with a partial handwritten number, and what looked like the first 3 letters of an address. She took a photo of it with her phone and did not touch it. Then she saw the second thing. On the far edge of the desk, under a coffee cup, was a visitor badge. Not a staff badge. A visitor badge, the kind issued to people who weren't regular hospital personnel. It had today's date on it, and a name printed in the small font of the automated badge system. The name was not Gall's. She photographed the badge without moving it. Then she backed out of the office and closed the door and called Breck. He picked up before the second ring. "Gall," she said. "Terrence Gall, Director of Operations. He ran the search this morning. His badge number is in the closure documentation on a pharmacy report I filed 18 months ago. He signed off on killing the investigation, and he's connected to the equipment procurement chain because his office controls the maintenance certification schedule." "Where is he now?" "I don't know. His office looks like he left in a hurry." She was moving down the corridor now, toward the stairwell. "There's a visitor badge on his desk. Someone came in today who isn't a regular staff member. I photographed it." "Send it to this number." He read her a string of digits. She sent it while she was still walking. A pause. "That name is in the OIG file," Breck said. "He's a contractor. He's been flagged in connection with 3 different procurement irregularities at facilities in 2 other states." "He came here today." "He came here today," Breck repeated, and his voice had taken on the specific quality she associated with someone recalibrating a threat assessment. "Avery, get back to the west corridor. Breck, Gall knows who you are now. If he's in this building and he's made, he has a reason to move before the federal investigators can contain the scene." His voice was careful but urgent. "I need you back here." She was already at the stairwell. She took the stairs. She was on the 2nd floor landing when she heard the door at the bottom of the stairwell open. She stopped. Footsteps on the stairs, coming up. 2 people, she thought. The footfalls were overlapping, not quite in sync, moving with the deliberate pace of people who were trying to be quiet but didn't have the habit of it. She looked up at the door above her. 3rd floor, which would put her back in the administrative wing and in the wrong direction. She looked at the 2nd floor door directly beside her. She pushed through it. The 2nd floor west corridor, the right corridor. But she had come out on the wrong end near the main entrance of the wing rather than the renovation section. She moved toward the far end, quickly. Behind her, she heard the stairwell door open. She did not run. Running was audible. She walked at the edge of running, which was the gait of someone with purpose rather than speed, and she counted the doors as she passed them and thought about the geometry of the floor and where she was relative to where Breck's man was posted and whether he could see this section of corridor from his position. She heard the footsteps behind her. She pushed through the door into the renovation section and kept moving. The corridor here was half lit, The overhead fixtures not yet fully installed. The walls bare drywall in some sections and bare framing in others. It had the disorienting quality of a space that was in between versions of itself. She moved through it with the certainty of someone who had read every facilities report on this section for the past 8 months and knew exactly how far the renovation extended. The room at the end, door closed. She knocked twice, the signal she'd established with Greta and hadn't told anyone else. A second. The door opened. Breck. His eyes assessed the corridor behind her in one look. "They're in the wing," she said. He stepped back and she entered. He closed the door. Vane was sitting up in the bed, the portable monitor steady beside him, and the man Breck had posted from the transfer team. A compact, watchful individual who had not introduced himself and whose presence was primarily communicative through the way he positioned himself near the door, had shifted to a standing position that was not quite combat-ready, but was not far from it. "How many?" Breck said. "2, I think. Coming up the stairs from the ground floor." She was thinking through the layout. If they know which room, they come straight down this corridor. If they don't know the specific room, they check the renovation section last because it's not in the active patient registry. "We're not in the active patient registry. The room reassignment wasn't documented." "Then we have time." Breck looked at the transfer team member. A short exchange of eye contact, the kind that communicated volume in a single second. The man moved to a position beside the door and took something from his jacket that he held at his side and didn't display. Avery looked at Vane. His monitor read 96/62. His jaw was set. He was watching the door with the attention of a man managing pain and adrenaline simultaneously and doing better than most people would have done. "When this is over," she said to him quietly, for no particular reason, "you're going to spend a week in an actual medical facility with actual monitoring." "Deal," he said, without looking away from the door. She stood beside the bed and waited. The corridor was quiet. Then it wasn't. She heard them stop outside the door. Not at the door. 2 doors down, which meant they were checking rooms in sequence. 1 door, then the next, methodical. She counted the seconds between openings. 7, 8 seconds per door. The door 2 rooms down opened and closed. The door 1 room down. Breck's hand made a minimal gesture to the transfer team member. The man beside the door placed his hand on the handle from the inside. Not to open it, but to control what happened when it opened from the outside. 7 seconds. Then, voices in the corridor. Not through the door. From further away, coming from the corridor entrance, and the voices were not quiet, and one of them she recognized. Greta. Greta's voice, loud in the specific way of someone who is being loud on purpose, talking to a second person about a patient's dietary requirements, with the kind of elaborate, slightly performative detail of a person keeping someone occupied. And the attending specifically noted no dairy because of the reaction in the last admission. "So I need you to pull the kitchen order before it goes down. I know it's not your department, but the kitchen has been ignoring the flags for 3 weeks. A second voice, male, uncertain, clearly someone being corralled. The footsteps outside the room stopped. Avery heard them recede. Going toward the corridor entrance, toward Greta's voice, and the inexorable pull of a very specific and very confident administrative complaint. The room stayed closed. 30 seconds. A minute. Breck exhaled. The transfer team member stepped back from the door. "She has no idea what she just did," the man said. The first words she had heard him speak all day. "She knows exactly what she did," Avery said. "What?" Gall was found in the hospital parking structure at 2:34 p.m. Not by Breck's people. By the Delmont PD officers who had arrived at 1:58 p.m. in response to a request from the OIG field coordinator, who had been working from a position 2 blocks from the hospital and had, in the hours since Breck's call, assembled sufficient cause for a formal detention request. Gall was at his car on the 3rd level, and whether he was attempting to leave or simply needed a moment to think about his options was a question he declined to answer clearly when the officers found him, which was its own kind of answer. He had his phone in his hand and had apparently been in the middle of a call. The call, when the carrier logs were subpoenaed later that afternoon, had been placed to an out-of-state number that was already in the OIG's flagged contact database. 14 seconds of connection before the officers arrived. Enough time to say something, maybe. Not enough time to say much. Avery learned about this from Breck, who had learned it from the OIG coordinator, who had relayed it in the practical, information-dense manner of federal investigators sharing operational updates with adjacent parties. She was in the corridor outside Vane's room when he told her, and she stood with her arms folded and processed it with the careful composure of someone who had been holding a great many things together for a long time. "The contractor," she said, "the one whose visitor badge was in Gall's office. Already picked up. He was still in the building. He'd gone to the cafeteria, apparently." Breck had the expression of a man who found this detail either darkly funny or simply baffling. "The OIG team is processing both of them now." "What does this mean for Harker?" "It means," Breck said, "that the equipment falsification records no longer exist in isolation. They're part of a procurement and compliance fraud that has been running through this facility's operational structure for at least 4 years, with connections to a broader network that the OIG has been tracking across multiple institutions." He looked at her. "Harker doesn't have to have known everything, but his signature is on the certification oversight reports. His signature is on the vendor contract renewals. His name is in the chain. He'll say he was deceived by Gall." "He might have been, partially." Breck's voice was even. "But the federal investigators are very good at determining where the deception ends and the willful blindness begins. That's their job, not ours." She nodded. "Yours," he said, "is currently to let someone else drive this for a few hours." "I have patience." "You have one patient." "I have a ward full of patients." "You have been suspended, reinstated, suspended again in spirit, if not officially, and have performed clinical interventions beyond your documented scope during what is now a federal evidence scene." He looked at her patiently. "Hargrove's nursing director has been in the building since noon and is managing the ward. You can take a breath." She looked at the door to Vane's room. "I need to tell him what's happening," she said. "He's been briefed." "Not by me." Breck looked at her for a moment. Then he stepped aside from the door. And Vane was better than he'd been 2 hours ago. The color had come back to some degree, and his pressure had climbed to 108/70, which was not ideal but was comfortable enough that she didn't immediately start running calculations. He was sitting up with the portable monitor beside him and the transfer team member near the door in the overall atmosphere of someone who had received significant information and was sitting with the weight of it. She told him about Gall, about the visitor badge and the access logs and the stairwell and Greta's performance in the corridor. He listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The procurement network," he said. "The documentation I was transporting. This connects." "I think so." "The rerouting of my transfer wasn't random. Someone who knew the route also had contact inside this facility. Gall was the contact." "That's what it looks like." "They were trying to—" He stopped, looked at his hands. "If I hadn't made it to a capable facility, if the vascular injury had progressed without someone identifying it, the documentation in the transfer would have been recovered from a vehicle with a deceased military officer. The chain of custody would have been broken. The investigation would have lost its anchor." She sat in the chair beside the bed. It was the first time she had sat down since approximately 3 a.m. "You're saying someone tried to kill you to kill the investigation." "I'm saying it's the most coherent explanation for why a routine transfer was rerouted through a region with substandard emergency medical capacity in a manner that exposed a classified transport to a facility with documented compliance fraud." He said it evenly, as someone who had spent his career dealing with the intersection of institutional corruption and physical violence and had developed a specific pragmatic register for it. "And I'm saying that the person who saved both my life and the investigation is sitting in a chair in an unfinished hospital room on the second floor." She looked at him. "I'm also saying," he continued, "that when this is over, I'm going to make sure everyone who needs to know that understands it clearly." "Derek?" "I'm not asking for permission." She looked at the monitor, the numbers held. "You should sleep," she said. "Probably." He didn't lie back immediately. "Avery, the name, the one I used in the bay this morning. Breck said it might have caused complications." "It did. It also helped identify Gall's connection, so—" She considered. "Net neutral." "I didn't know you were here. I didn't know you were—" He stopped. "I spent a long time not knowing what happened to you." I know. That's all I wanted to say. I'm not going to make a whole thing out of it. She looked at him. Okay. Okay, he said. He leaned back, closed his eyes. She sat for a moment longer. Then she went back to work. The afternoon moved at the pace of processes that had been set in motion and were now running under their own momentum. Avery moved between Vane's room and the nursing station with the quiet efficiency of someone who had identified the things within her control and was attending to those while leaving the rest to the people whose job it was. At 3:45 p.m., 2 federal agents, OIG, proper credentials, arrived on the administrative floor and entered Harker's office. She did not see this directly, but heard it from the nursing director, a woman named Dr. Seon Abara, who had been at Hargrove for 11 years and who had spent the afternoon making the patient roster function smoothly while everything above it fell apart. Abara told her in the specific, understated tone of someone who had strong feelings and had decided to perform professional composure. They're in Harker's office. They've been in there for 30 minutes. His assistant has been sent home. How's the ward? The ward is fine. It would be finer if you ate something. Avery looked at her. You've been here since yesterday, Abara said. Eat something. She ate half a granola bar from the nurse's station drawer and considered it sufficient. At 4:20 p.m., Whitfield, the board chair, called a meeting of the available board members in the second-floor conference room. Patricia Marsh attended. Dr. Ellery attended. Avery was not invited and did not attempt to attend, but she was in the corridor outside when it ended, and she watched the faces of the people coming out, and the faces told a reasonably complete story. Whitfield looked exhausted in the way of a man who has spent an afternoon doing something genuinely difficult for non-theatrical reasons. Patricia Marsh looked like someone who had been carrying weight and had just set it down, whether she had wanted to or not. Ellery looked like a man doing the careful calculation of what version of today's events he was going to tell himself going forward. She was almost at the stairwell when Patricia Marsh said her name. She turned. Marsh was standing in the corridor, folder in hand, with the expression of a woman composing something careful. Ms. Cross, I wanted to... She stopped. Started again. The administrative action this morning, the suspension and the hearing. I want you to know I raised concerns about the process before the meeting. I know, Avery said. You know? I saw you hesitate when Harker was building the case. You're a good lawyer, and a good lawyer doesn't hesitate in their own meeting unless they're not comfortable with the position they're being asked to defend. She held Marsh's gaze. You can file that wherever it's useful. Marsh looked at her for a moment. You're not going to make this easy for me. I'm not trying to make it hard. I'm tired. She paused. Is the administrative action formally withdrawn? As of the board meeting just now, yes. In writing, with documentation, by end of day. Thank you. She went to the stairwell. At 5:10 p.m., Roland Harker walked out of his office. He didn't walk out in the way she had imagined it, if she had imagined it. There was no drama in the physical fact of it, no visible collapse or overt display of consequence. He walked out of his office with his jacket on and his briefcase in his hand and 2 federal agents behind him, and he walked down the 4th-floor corridor and to the elevator, and the administrative assistants at their stations looked and then looked away. And the elevator doors closed, and that was that. She was told about this afterward, by Greta, who had apparently witnessed it from the end of the corridor and had texted Avery immediately, a text that read, "He just left with 2 agents, in the elevator." It actually happened. Avery read it in the chair beside Vane's bed, where she had returned after Vane's 5 p.m. vitals check, and from which she had not quite managed to make herself leave. News? Vane asked. He had slept for 90 minutes and was more coherent for it, though the quality of his alertness still had the careful edge of someone rationing energy. Harker's left the building, with or without choice in the matter? With significantly reduced choice. He was quiet for a moment. And the investigation? Still running. It's not finished. This is the beginning of a process, not the end. Is Gull talking? I don't know. That's not my part of it. He looked at the ceiling. You've been in that chair for 40 minutes. I know. You should go home. You're still not cleared for transfer. Osei's team is taking over at 6. Breck arranged it. You don't have to stay. She looked at the monitor. The numbers were the best they'd been all day. "I know," she said, and didn't move. He didn't push it. They sat in the particular quiet of two people who have been through something together and have run out of the immediate necessity that had been keeping the more complicated things at a manageable distance. "There's going to be a process," he said finally. "The identity, the Kessler file. People are going to want to talk to you." "I know. Some of it is going to be uncomfortable. Most of the important things are." He looked at her. "You're not scared." "I told you, careful." "You said careful wasn't the same as scared." "It isn't." "What is it the same as?" She thought about 3 years of night shifts, about the specific discipline of staying small in a place that was large enough to swallow you, about the pharmacy report that had been closed without action, and the defibrillator pads in Bay 3, and the crack in the consultation room plant pot covered by a piece of yellowed tape. "Patience," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "The commendation," he said. "I'm going to make sure it's processed, not as a historical footnote, properly. We don't need to talk about that now." "I know we don't. I'm telling you anyway." His voice had the quality of something he had been holding a long time and had decided to set down. "You earned it 4 years ago. Everything that happened today, that was a separate thing." She was about to answer when her phone buzzed. A message from Breck, and the message was 4 words and a document attachment, and the 4 words were enough to make her go very still. "Kessler file has been unsealed." She looked at the attachment. The document was 63 pages. She didn't read all of it in that moment. She couldn't, not there, not in that light, not with what the day had already cost her. But she read the first page, the operational summary, the date, the names of the personnel listed, her name, her real name, and below it, in the clinical field notes section, a 6-line entry in a different hand than the rest of the page. Vane's handwriting. She recognized it. She had seen it on intake documentation years before, and the specific slant of his letters had not changed. That read like an account of something that had happened in a very bad hour, in a very bad place, and that ended with a sentence that had been classified for 4 years, and that now, on this page in this unsealed file, was simply a sentence. This officer's actions were the direct cause of the survival of 4 personnel, including this reporting officer. The record should reflect that without qualification. She closed the attachment. The monitor beeped. "Avery," Vane said. He had been watching her face. She put the phone in her pocket. "The file's been unsealed," she said. He went still. "I'm going to go read it somewhere that isn't here," she said. "And then I'm going to come back and we're going to have a conversation that's probably overdue." He nodded slowly. She stood up, picked up her jacket from the back of the chair. She was at the door when he said her name again. Her real name. The one from the file, spoken quietly in the unfinished room with its temporary light and its machine keeping steady count. And she stopped with her hand on the frame and didn't turn around, because if she turned around, she was going to have to deal with all of it right now. And all of it right now was more than the next 60 seconds could hold. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed. She walked out. In the corridor, 3 doors down, Greta was at the temporary supply cart doing an inventory that clearly did not require the level of concentration she was applying to it, and when she looked up and saw Avery's face, she didn't say anything, which was the right call. "Go home at 6, Avery told her. "You've been here since yesterday." "So have you." "I know." She kept walking. "Go home, Greta." She took the stairwell down to the ground floor and she was crossing the lobby toward the side exit when she saw the woman from the morning, the one who had been at the workstation near the imaging suite, the one with the short hair and the quiet watching alertness. The woman was standing near the reception desk with a man Avery didn't recognize, and they were looking at a tablet, and as Avery passed, the woman looked up. They made eye contact. The woman said, "Miss Cross, I was about to come find you." Avery stopped. "I'm Special Agent Rourke, OIG." The woman held up a credentials badge. "We've been reviewing the documentation associated with your internal reports over the last 3 years." She paused. "I need to ask you about 7 specific filings that were closed without action between 18 and 30 months ago. I believe you have records of the original discrepancies. Avery looked at her. I have records, she said. I thought you might. Rourke's expression was professionally neutral, but there was something in it, a quality of careful, deliberate respect that was different from the way people at Hargrove General had been looking at Avery Cross for 3 years. We'd like to review them with you. Tonight, if possible. Avery looked at the exit door, then at the agent. My office, Avery said and walked toward the nursing station, is a chair in the break room on the 3rd floor. Is that acceptable? Completely, said Special Agent Rourke, and followed her without hesitation. The break room on the 3rd floor had 3 chairs, a table with a coffee ring stain that had been there since before Avery's time, and a window that looked out onto the hospital's inner courtyard where a single tree had spent 3 years growing at an angle no one had corrected. Agent Rourke sat across from her with a tablet and a recorder and the careful, unhurried manner of someone who understood that the person across the table had been awake for over 18 hours and was running on something that wasn't quite energy anymore. She didn't waste time with preamble. Walk me through the first report, Rourke said. The dispensary discrepancy. Start with what you saw, not what you concluded. Avery walked her through it. She talked for 2 hours, not continuously. Rourke asked questions, precise and well-targeted, the kind of questions that told Avery the agent had already read the documents and was verifying sequence and sourcing rather than learning the facts for the first time. The recorder sat between them, and Avery did not look at it after the first few minutes. She looked at the table and she looked at Rourke, and she described in the specific, unembellished language of someone reporting clinical observations. 7 instances of documented irregularity over 3 years, each one filed and suppressed, each one connected, as she could now see clearly, with the pattern visible for the first time in full, to the same operational chain, Gall's signature or Gall's direction, somewhere in each closure. You knew they were connected, Rourke said at one point. It wasn't a question. I suspected. I didn't have the architecture. Avery looked at her. You can see the whole machine from outside it. From inside, you see parts. But you kept filing. Someone had to. Rourke looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not quite admiration and not quite something else, but was the deliberate, considered attention of a person accounting for something they had not fully anticipated. Then she looked back at her tablet and moved to the next report. At 8:40 p.m., Avery's phone buzzed with a message from Breck. Vane is being transferred to Regional Medical in Meridian. Osei signed off. He'll be there by 10. He asked me to tell you he'll call when he's settled. She looked at the message for a moment. Then she looked at the next message, which arrived 4 minutes later, directly from a number she didn't recognize, but that identified itself in the first line as Vane's personal cell. I don't make promises I don't intend to keep. We'll talk when I can talk properly. D. She set the phone face down on the table. Rourke was watching her with the professional non-reaction of someone who had decided not to notice. Do you need a few minutes? No, Avery said. Next report. The interview concluded at 9:55 p.m. Rourke closed the recorder and looked at her notes for a moment, then at Avery with the expression of someone organizing what she was about to say. I want to be direct with you, she said. What you've given us tonight, combined with the physical evidence from the equipment assessments, gives us a documentation trail that is significantly more coherent than what we had this morning. The 7 reports you filed are now part of a federal evidentiary record. Your name is on them, and that's going to become public as the investigation moves forward. I understand. Your full identity, the protected identity situation, that's a separate process that's above my level. But I've been told it's being addressed by people who have the authority to address it properly. She paused. For whatever it's worth from where I sit, what you did in this building for 3 years and today both is the kind of thing that federal investigations like ours depend on and almost never get to acknowledge directly. Avery looked at the coffee ring on the table. It wasn't heroism, she said. I filed reports because the alternative was pretending I hadn't seen what I saw. That's not a virtue. That's just not being able to unknow a thing. A lot of people manage to unknow things quite successfully. I know. She looked up. That's the problem. Rourke nodded once, slowly. She gathered her materials and stood, and the gesture had a finality to it that felt earned rather than abrupt. We'll be in touch. There will be follow-up interviews. The process will take time. I work night shifts, Avery said. I have time. Well, the formal consequences arrived over the following weeks in the practical, unspectacular manner that institutional consequences usually do, not in a single dramatic moment, but in an accumulating series of documented actions that together built something irrevocable. Roland Harker was placed on administrative leave within 48 hours of the federal agents entering his office. By the end of the following week, the board of Hargrove General had accepted his resignation and appointed Whitfield as interim administrator, a role the former board chair had visibly mixed feelings about, and approached with the meticulous, somewhat grim energy of a man who has decided that if the job needs doing properly, he is apparently the person doing it. Harker's legal situation moved more slowly, as legal situations do, but it moved in a direction that had been determined from the moment the OIG matched his certification signatures to the falsified maintenance logs. The eventual charges, fraud, falsification of safety records, negligent endangerment, were filed 4 months later and covered a pattern of conduct that stretched back 6 years and 3 facilities. Terrence Gall cooperated with the investigation, which surprised some people and surprised Avery not at all. Cooperation was the calculation of a practical man who understood the weight of the evidence and chose the option that minimized his personal exposure. His testimony about the procurement network was, by all accounts, substantial. His sentence when it came was not lenient, but it was not the maximum, and the difference between those two things was the value assigned to his cooperation by people who made those calculations professionally. The contractor who had visited Hargrove on the day of Vane's transfer, the one whose visitor badge Avery had photographed, was a thread that unraveled a significantly larger network than the OIG's investigation had initially mapped. That process was ongoing, and its details were not disclosed publicly, and Avery did not ask about them because they were not hers to ask about. Dr. Ellery never apologized. She had not expected him to. He filed an amended report acknowledging the fasciotomy procedure and his role as the physician of record, which was the institutional version of an apology and was, in its own way, more useful than the personal version. He was not a bad surgeon. He was a man who had been granted too much authority for too long without adequate accountability, and the experience of the morning in Bay 1 had, at minimum, introduced him to the concept of his own fallibility in a way that had not previously been accessible to him. Whether that introduction changed anything in the long run was a question that would answer itself over time. Avery was not holding her breath. 6 weeks after the events at Hargrove General, the Kessler operational file was formally referenced in a congressional oversight briefing. Avery was not in the room for that briefing, but Breck was, and he called her afterward from a number that she now recognized and answered on the second ring. "It's on the record," he said. "What specifically?" "Your role, the field actions, the commendation." A pause. "All of it." She was standing in her apartment, which was a small apartment in a neighborhood of Delmont that was not the nicest neighborhood but had good light in the morning, and she was looking out the window at the street below where a woman was walking a very old dog at the pace the dog required, and she felt something shift in her chest that was not relief exactly, but was the closest thing to relief she had access to. "Okay," she said. "That's all you've got? What do you want me to say?" "I don't know. Something. It's been 4 years, Avery." "I know how long it's been." She looked at the street. "Is it going to create problems? The disclosure?" "The protected identity situation has been formally dissolved. The classification on your service record has been lifted. Everything that was sealed is unsealed." His voice was careful but not cautious. The difference between precision and hesitation. "There may be people who have questions. Journalists, eventually. But the official position is clear, and the official position is correct, and that makes it substantially easier to manage than the alternative." "And Derek?" A short pause. "He's been cleared for limited duty. He's been asking about you." "I know. We've talked." "Have you?" "Don't make it into something." "I'm not making it into anything." He was quiet for a moment. "There's something else. The reason I'm calling tonight specifically." She waited. The OIG, in coordination with the Department of Defense Medical Oversight Office, has been developing a program, Joint Civilian Military Trauma Compliance. The idea is to embed oversight capacity in regional medical facilities, people who can identify the kind of systemic failures that allowed the Hargrove situation to develop before they develop. Early detection, documentation support, protocol development. He paused. They want someone to design the training component, the clinical piece specifically, how you teach people to see what they've been conditioned not to see. She was quiet. They asked for you by name, Breck said. By your actual name. Outside, the woman with the old dog had stopped to let the dog smell something at the base of a lamppost. The dog was taking its time. The woman was waiting with the patience of someone who had been doing this long enough to understand that this was the dog's walk, not hers. Where would it be based? Avery asked. Flexible. You'd travel for the installation work. The design phase can happen from wherever you are. I'd keep my nursing license active. That's not a condition, but it's not a conflict either. It's not a condition, she said. It's not negotiable. Understood. A beat. Is that a yes? She thought about 7 reports filed into silence. About Bay 1 and the expired defibrillator pads and the dispensary report and the specific grinding discipline of watching a system fail slowly and being the only person writing it down. About what it would have meant in any of those years to have had a protocol, a framework, someone who had been trained to look at the same thing she was looking at and recognize it for what it was. Yes, she said. That's a yes, but the formal reinstatement of Lieutenant Maravos's service record, along with the presentation of the commendation that had been written 4 years earlier and buried, took place on a Tuesday morning in a conference room at a military administrative facility in Meridian. Not a ceremony exactly, but not nothing either. A handful of people who knew the full context of what the documents represented, and a process that moved through its required steps with the institutional dignity of something being done correctly after having been done wrong. Vane was there. He was on limited duty, and he stood straighter than he should have been standing, given where he was 6 weeks prior, which she noticed and did not comment on, because she had learned that Derek Vane's relationship with physical limitations was not one that benefited from external observation. He stood next to her when they handed her the commendation document, and he didn't make a speech because she had specifically asked him not to, but he looked at her with the direct, unguarded look of a man who has carried something for a long time and has finally put it down in the right place. And she looked back at him with a steadiness that was not the performed composure she had spent 3 years constructing, but something realer and less defended, and that was enough. It was enough. Breck shook her hand afterward and said nothing except, "Welcome back," which was the right thing to say, and the right length for it. She drove back to Delmont that afternoon. She had a meeting with Special Agent Rourke at 4, a follow-up on the evidentiary record, and she had a shift at Hargrove the following morning. The nursing director had asked her back as a senior clinical consultant while the restructured administration rebuilt its protocols, and she had agreed to 3 months with the explicit understanding that she was also taking the OIG program role and that both things could coexist because she was not the kind of person who did only one thing at a time. Whitfield had looked briefly pained when she had outlined the terms and had then agreed to all of them, which told her that the board had developed a productive new relationship with the concept of her terms. She drove through Delmont in the late afternoon light, which was the particular gold light of autumn going into winter, and the city looked the same as it had always looked. Not remarkable, not one of anyone's top 10 lists, built for function rather than impression. She had lived here for 3 years under a name that wasn't hers, and had built a life inside that name that was quieter than any life she had lived before. And something about that quietness had been, despite everything, real. She had not been pretending to be a nurse. She had been a nurse. She had been a nurse who was also something else she had been forbidden to be, and the years of keeping those two things in separate rooms inside herself had cost her something she was only beginning to calculate the full shape of. The cost was real. The calculation was not finished. That was, she had come to understand, the honest version of how these things worked. There was no single morning where everything resolved cleanly. There was the gradual, imperfect process of reassembling yourself from the pieces that survived, and some of the pieces didn't fit back together exactly the way they had before. And that was not failure. That was just the truth of what time and pressure did to people, which was the same thing it did to everything, which was to change them into whatever they were capable of becoming. She pulled into the parking lot of Hargrove General at 3:52 p.m. She sat in the car for a moment, looked at the building, the same building she had walked out of in the cold dark at 5 in the morning 6 weeks ago with a security escort and a suspension notice, and the specific quiet fury of a woman who had been told she was less than what she was. Again, by people who would have preferred she made it easier for them by agreeing. She had never agreed. That was the thing, she thought. Not the military background, not the tactical training, not the specific knowledge that had let her see what was happening in Bay 1 before anyone else could. Those were circumstances. The thing underneath the circumstances, the refusal to unknow a thing, the insistence on filing the report even when the report went nowhere, the willingness to stand in that trauma bay and say, "Step back right now, all of you." That was not something that had been trained into her. That was something she had always had, and it had cost her, and it had saved her, and it had, in the end, saved other people too. And she was not going to waste time being grateful to the people who had tried to take it from her. She got out of the car, walked across the parking lot, and through the doors of Hargrove General Hospital, and the lobby was the same lobby it had always been, and the woman at reception looked up and said, "Afternoon, Ms.?" Cross and Avery said, "Afternoon" back and kept walking, because she had a meeting at 4 and a shift in the morning, and a program to build, and a conversation she still owed Derek Vane when both their schedules aligned, and a broken watch she had been meaning to replace for 2 years. She took the stairs. There's a particular kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask for the room's attention before it acts, and it doesn't wait to be recognized before it does what needs to be done. It files the report when the report goes nowhere. It redirects the gurney to the right bay. It stays in the building when it's been asked to leave, because there is a patient in Bay 1 who is not yet safe, and someone has to know that. Most people who have this kind of strength spend years being told that it doesn't count, that what they see isn't what's there, that their reports are procedural irregularities rather than evidence, that the noise they're making is the problem rather than the thing they're making noise about. The ones who keep making it anyway, quietly, consistently, in the middle of a night shift when no one is watching, are the reason that some of the things that are supposed to hold actually hold. That's not a tidy ending. It's not a clean victory. It's just the truth about how things get better, which is slowly, at cost, by the people willing to keep paying it.